Day 2 from National Harbor, and joining me is a man who needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. He's Dr. Ben Carson, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and now running American Cornerstone Institute, which I know is such an important project for you because it really sort of is the mandate of American Cornerstone Institute is just that, to bring every conversation in this town, in Washington, back down to those principles, the cornerstone that our nation was founded on. Well, we've really lost our way. That it's like the things that you care about are never part, or that we care about are never part of the conversation
Well,
here.
we have completely lost our way. I talked to a lot of people from other countries. Every one of them has the same question for me. What's happened to America?
Yeah.
And they're shocked because if we can go down this pathway, who else has got a chance?
Right.
And what we have to do is really start refocusing people on those cornerstone principles that made us great in the first place, like our faith, which teaches us to love your neighbor, not to cancel your neighbor. Liberty, the importance of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. You see how we're trying to suppress that, how we're trying to censor people. The concept of community. How did we get to be great? We had all these people from different countries all over the place in these little communities. Sometimes they could barely even talk to each other because they have language problems. But they learned how to subjugate their own private issues into the good for all, the good of all. This is an expression that was used frequently by the founders of our country. And it worked very well. And they not only survived, but they thrived and they multiplied and formed a very strong country. And then the concept of life.
Yes.
From the womb to the tomb, caring about the quality of life of our fellow citizens.
You know, I hear you say that, and what strikes me is, you know, when President Trump and when the Trump administration and conservatives in general use the phrase "Make America Great Again," you see it everywhere here at CPAC, right? Make America Great Again. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about, getting back to, there was a time not too long ago where that was in the forefront of everyone's mind as an American. When the left hears "Make America Great Again," they say, oh, you mean segregation? You mean slavery? You mean women in the kitchen? You mean all of these things? And it's always those connotations. And I got to say, I mean, the argument can be made, I've heard you made the argument that even in segregation times, which are horrible and awful and evil, Black Americans actually had a better opportunity in many respects because of faith, because of community, because they looked out for each other.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the
And that's obviously not an endorsement of segregation. It was evil and it was wrong, and thank God Republicans voted to end it in the 60s.
But one of the chapters in my book, Created Equal, talks about some of the black communities that were doing incredibly well because of their emphasis on education and hard work. And I also make the point that one of the groups that has the highest per capita income in the United States are Nigerians. Now, they have black skin. Why do they do so well? Well, if you go to a Nigerian household, what do you find? The bachelor's degree is the baseline. That's where you start. And there's a lot of emphasis on family. Well, also, if you take native-born African-American families, where those things are emphasized, education and family, there's no wealth gap. That should tell you something.
Yeah.
Maybe we're blaming the wrong things.
When you were Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, I know that you were devastated by the sight of the homeless encampments that were in California, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Baltimore, where you used to spend plenty of your time at Johns Hopkins. It's just gotten worse. Is there now time, a climate in this country for a conversation about the crime of criminal vagrancy, about how the truly compassionate approach is to not tolerate that anymore? Because we've tried the other thing. We've tried the other direction. And it ain't working.
Well, you know, they push so hard the concept of housing first.
Yes.
And I don't disagree.
Real fast, housing first means get people in a house. Don't worry about their drug addiction. Don't worry about their mental illness. Don't worry about all that stuff. Just, we got to get a house. But that means you have to spend a lot of money to build a house or acquire an apartment, that kind of thing.
Well, I push the concept of housing first, second, and third. Housing second is you got to find out why they're on the street.
Yes.
And housing third, you got to fix it. Now, that you have to recognize that 60% of the people who are out there are either drug addicts or mentally ill. If you don't deal with that situation, you're not really doing them a favor. And even the people who've been put into housing on the Housing First program, 90% of them within 8 to 10 years are back on the street. So you haven't fixed anything if you're doing it that way. And that's what we have to recognize. We have to look at the data and let that guide us in terms of what we do. And we have to get rid of some of all the awful regulations. We have technology now that allows us to build housing at a reasonable price.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time you get to adding all the regulations onto it, you take something that cost $150,000 and make it into $600,000.
Well, and sadly, of course, that cheap housing, nobody makes a ton of money if you're a real estate developer and you're giving big donations to the Democrats who run these cities, Dr. Carson.
That's
so that's
correct.
why that never goes anywhere either. There's another aspect of that when you talk about faith. You know, if you go to any major urban city, New York, Los Angeles, the churches that have missions to actually service the homeless and actually give them care, they know how to do this right.
They do.
And yet many of these cities refuse to work with faith-based organizations because they have an antagonism to faith-based organizations. Or oftentimes those faith-based organizations say, we'll give you a bed, we'll give you job training, but you got to get off drugs. And the city's like, oh, well, you can't make demands.
Well, we not only worked with the faith-based organizations during the last administration, but actually created the Mustard Seed program.
I remember.
And recognizing that the churches, the people who are right there in the midst of the community, can do a much better job than a bunch of bureaucrats sitting in an office in Washington, D.C.
That's why they didn't like you here in this town.
So why don't we help them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any inkling to get back into politics? People
ask me that all the time.
Look at the crowd around here and everything.
Yeah.
People really do love you. They are drawn to you because you have a very sincere and emphatic approach. It's a voice we don't often hear in politics, sadly, because the loudest voice in the room always gets the attention.
Well, I don't particularly want to do it, but as I say, I will always do what the Lord wants me to do. I just hope that's not it. And and working with American Cornerstone, with the Little Patriots program, and helping those who are in the political arena to get reoriented in the right way, can potentially have even a bigger influence.
Considering you were a pediatric neurosurgeon, famous, everybody knows your incredible story and history. The Dobbs decision must have been an emotional moment for you when you saw finally these little human babies will now give a chance to live if we can now follow through and win the state level fights that we need to win.
Well, if you know the way that a baby is formed with a female gamete and a male gamete with 23 chromosomes, they come together, get 46 chromosomes within 8 weeks.
Yeah.
You got little eye sockets and fingers and toes and a beating heart. How can you say?
Wait, Stacey Abrams said that's not really a heartbeat, remember? That's this white man who invented the ultrasound, invented it.
Well, I don't like to talk about people, so we won't go into Stacey Abrams. But
maybe Dr. Ben Carson knows a little bit more about the development of the human baby in the womb.
Absolutely. And, some years ago, this beautiful statuesque woman comes up to my wife and says, "Are you Mrs. Carson? Are you Dr. Carson's wife?" She says, "Yes." And she said, "Many years ago, your husband operated on me and my twin sister while we were still in our mother's womb. So nobody's going to ever convince me that it's a bunch of useless cells that's in that mother's womb."
This is why I love interviewing you. I could talk to you all day, but sadly we're out of time.
Indeed.
And you are in demand here. Dr. Ben Carson, you're an inspiring man, and I'm glad you're on my side.
So
I'm
good
proud
to
to
see
be
you.
on your side.
Thanks for being a patriot.
Oh, of course. Thank you, sir. That's Cornerstone Institute, Dr. Ben Carson. We'll be back. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here. You are watching Salem News Channel.